Hi, my name is Jay Wenk. I live in Woodstock, very happily in Woodstock, New York, and I'm a longtime member of Veterans for Peace. I was born in Boston, in Brookline actually, a subsection of Boston, in 1926, in October of 1926. And our family lived there until I was close to 7 years old, at which point we moved to Brooklyn. As a young boy in Brooklyn, I grew up during the so-called Great Depression. And our family were poor. My mother baked cakes and cookies at home, and my father sold them. He went around in the corridors. And so marching in parades and making the Pledge of Allegiance and saluting and just burning with anticipation to get into the army and to go fight, as we got older. Never thought that I was anything other than waterproof. None of us going in to the military service, whichever branch we were in, none of us that I knew ever thought that we were going to get killed or maimed, wounded. Although my best friend who lived next door in Brooklyn was killed in the Philippines, but I never thought it would touch me. Never. And I think that was true for most of us when we went in. Those days during World War II were so different than our days here in this country now with the various wars that are going on. It was so different then. It was a different world. The entire country was at war. There were ration tickets that you had to get to buy food, to buy clothing, to buy shoes. You didn't just go to the store and buy a new pair of shoes, you bought them when you had the right ration ticket. Foods of all sort were rationed: meat, poultry, butter, spices, everything. Also, there were constant drives in everybody's neighborhood to, we're approaching the sound of the guns. In the neighborhoods, very often there were collections of cooking fats that we took in cans from our homes and brought to the collection centers that were used, I was told, for the production of explosives. Newspapers, aluminum. People took the bumpers off their cars. That was in an era when there were bumpers on cars. They took the bumpers off and donated those bumpers to the drives for steel. And this was constant. This was not once in a while. Every billboard that you saw had a pro-war message. Every newspaper, every magazine. There was no TV then, if you can believe there was no TV then, but radio was constant with the war, the war, the war, the war. And so many homes had gold stars hanging in the windows for the symbolically relating to the poor bastards who were killed in action in the Pacific, in the Africa, in Europe, everywhere, in the air, in the sea, and land. It was an unimaginably different scene. We're getting closer to the guns. Parenthetically, when I did get to Europe and we were driving on trucks and approaching the front lines, being delivered to our respective units, military units. And as a raw rookie, I could hear the sound of the guns in the distance, and it was exciting. Yeah, I want to get there. I want to be part of it. A couple of months later, when I'd been wounded and was going back to the front lines and I heard the sounds of the gun, I was shitting in my pants. And I was then the old man to the new recruits who were going up to the front lines for the first time. And that dichotomy is something. But in any event, I guess I eventually enlisted in the Army. There was a draft back then, and I'm not sure how drafts work subsequently, but during World War II, if you were drafted, you could be sent to the Navy, the Coast Guard, the Air Force, the artillery, whatever, in the Army. And I had and still have a good case of claustrophobia, and I didn't want to go into the Navy. I visualized myself down the bowels of a ship that was just torpedoed and was on its way down, and no way. And so I enlisted in the Army, and I was put into the infantry, which suited me very well. Well, I was still a Boy Scout. I had carried with me a Boy Scout can opener, in case the Army didn't supply something like that. And another thing I had was a pocket knife with a saw blade on it. And I had taken that very deliberately because I figured I might get captured by the Germans, and that little saw blade would help me to get my way out of the concentration camps. Naive? Oh boy. Shy? Oh boy. Inexperienced? However, one thing I knew how to do from being a Boy Scout was how to trench a pup tent, so you could keep dry in a rain. And as luck would have it, never had to do that. We never had pup tents to deal with. We were moving too much. I don't remember if I mentioned that when we got off the trains, we put on trucks to take us to our units. For me, it happened to be Company A of the 359 Infantry Regiment of the 90th Infantry Division of 3rd Army. That was Patton's Army. And I remember early one morning we arrived very early, it was still dark out, at the squad that I was put member of. And the very first thing the sergeant said to us was, do not shoot at enemy airplanes. In basic training, we had been taught, you see an enemy airplane overhead, you get your rifles, bang, 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 bang. On the line, you did not do that. You didn't want to attract attention. No. If you didn't have to fire or shoot or be in a dangerous position, you didn't, Almost immediately, our squad left the area of where we got off the trucks, and as the newest member, I was supposed to be first scout. And the guy who was first scout and would have moved back to be second scout said to me, an older guy from Boston, he said to me, you scared, kid? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay, I'll take first scout. You stay behind me. Don't get too close and do what I do. I remember I also had slight muscular pain in my side, and I had the idea that that's where I was going to get hit, the superstition. Later that day, well, I don't know, combat during the Battle of the Bulge was awful. And I know about it because I was told about it, but thank goodness I was not in that. We were cleaning up the Bulge, and the Germans were already on the run. We were engaged in firefights with the Germans, and at one point I remember seeing the helmet and the head of a guy in front of me nearby just disappeared. It was gone. He'd been hit by a burst of the German burp gun that fired very fast. It was and would fire him. If it hit you in the arm, it would take your arm off because there was so many slugs coming. Another one of the first things that we did when we got on the line, the older guys told us to take our gas masks and cut 2 links out of the rubber hose that went from the gas cleaning compartment, up to the mask. And we used those 2 links to put around our dog tags. And the idea was to keep the dog tags from clinking when we were trying to approach a heavily fortified or whatever thing, or at night or whatever. And I remember feeling scared shitless at throwing away the gas mask in order to keep my dog tags from clinking. But fortunately, there was never any gas used. Though at one point, and not near us, there was an American or British, or perhaps both, supply depot where artillery had hit and exploded some of the stored gas that we had, the poison gas, and that went flying out, but it never came anywhere near us. So ultimately, there was no reason to fear not having a gas mask, but those moments was frightful.
In your book, you talked about you were a sniper?
Well, at one point, I wasn't officially a sniper, but at one point, a lieutenant asked me to be a sniper to take down a German who was sniping at us. And I was a very good shot then. And I was very good. I had the top marks in my basic training class group. And so I zeroed in on this person and fired one shot, and he didn't fire anymore, so I presumed he was taken care of, or at least scared the shit out of him. Our greatest fear at that point was encountering Tiger tanks. Later on, we encountered the SS as we got further into Germany. We were going southeast out of northwestern Germany down toward Bavaria and through Bavaria into Czechoslovakia. We were near Prague when the war ended. Later on, as I say, we were coming across the SS. Earlier, we were dealing with the Wehrmacht. And the Wehrmacht, were guys like us. They were Germans who had joined or were enlisted or whatever into the army. And they were nowhere near as fierce and as horrible as the SS. And subsequently, by the way, I've learned to forgive the Wehrmacht, but not the SS. They still remain very bad people in my book. So in any event, Dealing with the Wehrmacht wasn't too bad. I mean, we would be fighting and shooting at each other and lobbing hand grenades back and forth and mortars and stuff like that. But we didn't have really close encounters, and we had nothing like hand-to-hand fighting at that point. Later on with the SS, we did, further east. And the SS was smart, the Wehrmacht, they were smart enough to surrender when it was advisable to surrender. I remember one day when we were, a day before we went into the city of Mainz, next to the Rhine River. And we had taken a village, and we chased the Germans out. And later that afternoon, we were ordered to run up this hill, where there were on top of the hill there were German trenches, and we were ordered to take the trenches. And we went running up the hill. I was not in great shape. I was a young kid, 18, but after a while, I couldn't. Running in the hot sun, carrying all the gear and the hand grenades and the M1, and there, when you hear a bullet whiz past close to your head, it's a sound that you never forget. It's not like the whine of a slug in the near distance, but it sounds like a very angry bee. Bzzz, go right past you. In any event, so I got into the trenches. I was out of breath. We all got into the trenches. And I sat down for a minute in the trench to try to catch my breath. And there was a shadow come over me, and I looked up, and there was a German soldier with his Mauser. And I was sure, I had no strength at all. And I was sure this is the end of my life. This guy's going to kill me. And I look up, and he asks me in German, "Where do I go to surrender?" So I pointed the way. Well, we were in a firefight. I don't remember exactly where this was. We were going through woods. Our whole platoon, there were a couple of squads. And we going through the woods, and at one point we crossed at right angles a road, a fire break through the woods. And just as I got there, I saw a couple of hundred yards, we all saw a couple of hundred yards away from us, some Germans crossing just as we were. They had been going parallel to us, and they crossed into the woods. And so we rushed the rest of the way past the fire break, and I don't remember who opened fire first, us or the Germans, but in any event, we were involved in a fire fight. Oh, I'm mixing two different scenes up, but I'll tell you. And this was the very first firefight I was in. And so this was very soon after I got to the line. And a couple of the guys that were up front were hit. And they called out, and some of our guys, ran up to get them. And I was terrified. I was scared shitless. And so I hid behind a tree for a little bit. And then I realized that what I was doing was being a coward, and so I got my ass up, and I went up and joined the guys that had run forward, and there were several of our people carrying the 2 or 3 wounded men back, and I, along with others, were providing cover fire. But the other time, when there was a week or so later on, we were in another firefight late in the day, and I don't remember exactly where it was, someplace in Germany. And there was a grenade, a German grenade that was tossed over our way. And I picked up a piece of shrapnel in my shin. There's a little scar there. Wasn't bad. I mean, the medics came and they put a bandage on it and some sulfonamide. What was the name of that stuff that we used? Sulfonamide? What? Okay, an antibacterial agent. And that night, I developed a case of pneumonia and pleurisy. And pleurisy is a very painful thing where there's an opening in the lung, the lining of the lung, and air gets in there or escapes from there. And it's very, very painful. And so I was making a lot of noise when I was breathing, trying to breathe. And so the next morning, they put me in a truck and sent me back, not for the wound, which wasn't bad, but because I was making so much noise, I would give away our position. Another village, I found my way. I didn't have the strength to carry the M1. I was dragging it. And found my way to a first aid station. And I don't remember it, but I know that I passed out there, and I remember I woke up in a hospital back on the other side of the Rhine, on the western side of the Rhine. And I was gaga there for a couple of days. They were trying to, I had terrible fever. They were trying to bring my fever down. And, with all kinds of whatever. And eventually 2 nurses came in and stripped me bare and doused my body with alcohol and stood on each side of me flapping towels to chill me. And that brought the fever down, and I found out then that I had pneumonia as well as pleurisy, and again, the leg was no big deal. When I rejoined my company, the words of the sergeant when we got off the truck, when I first got on the line that early morning, came back to haunt, because there were maybe 10, 12 men that I knew that were there in the company. And all the rest were replacements. And it seems that while I was away, the platoon had been crossing a field. The new recruits had either hadn't been told the warning about shooting at airplanes, or they had forgotten. In any event, a couple of German planes, maybe Focke-Wulfs or Messerschmitt, I don't know, were going by, and these recruits fired at them, caught the attention of the German aircraft, and blew the outfit to Kingdom Come. And as I say, when I got back, there was just a couple of guys there that I knew. I do remember that the fiercest fighting that I was involved with, and the rest of my platoon, was maybe a week or two before the war ended, and we were either in southeastern Germany or southwestern Czechoslovakia, maybe both. And we were attacked on 2 different occasions, I think maybe a couple of days apart, by German women who were attached in some way to the SS. And they attacked us mostly with machine guns. they didn't have artillery or tanks. And these women were fierce. They would not surrender. On both occasions, we had to wipe them out. And it was difficult. It was not easy. It was awful. It was, we didn't know. I didn't know until a little later that they were women. I couldn't tell. They were, helmets and uniforms. And we knew they were SS because of the black uniforms. But we didn't know until the firing stopped that they were women. There were maybe 24 in each. So we were directed to Theresa Neumann's home. I had no idea who Theresa Neumann was. She's no longer with us. And I knock on the door, and I'm the one that's doing all this because I speak the best broken German. And her mother and her father come to the door and asked who we were and what we wanted. And it should have been apparent. We're wearing our uniforms, and we're still carrying weapons which we had taken out of the arsenal before because we never knew what we might encounter. In any event, so I said, we're American soldiers, and we came to see Theresa Neumann. And the mother says, all in German, she said, go upstairs. And the 7 or 8 of us go up the stairs, narrow stairs, and into a room. And we go into a rather small room. On one side, just inside the doorway, is a huge bird cage from floor to ceiling. And it extends from just inside the door to the far wall, which wasn't very far. And there were just local birds in it, no, not exotic birds, but local ones. And then on that far wall, there are 2 windows. And between the windows, a little round table where the village priest is reading the Bible. And over here, just a couple of feet away, it's a really small room, there's a woman lying on a cot. Maybe it was a narrow bed. And she appears to be unconscious. And down at her feet, through the bedclothes, and everything was white, the bedclothes, there are 2 bloody wounds, coming up from where the arch of her foot is. Her hands are on top of the bedclothes. And on the back of the hands, there's 2 more bloody wounds. Through the bedclothes over here, I think it was, I sometimes forget it was this side or this side, there's a long, bloody mark that I find, move on, where her nightgown is open, I could see another oozing series of wounds that looked like it was made from a coarse, twisted rope. It had like the indentations of coarse rope. All around her head, above the pillow, little pinpricks of blood. And last and furthest from, at least from under her eyelids, tears of blood coming down her cheeks. Scout's honor. I knew enough from reading in my lifetime that I'm witnessing somebody with the wounds of Christ. The purported wounds of Christ. I'm also an atheist. But I've read enough to know that, and the long thing here is made from the Roman soldier with the lance that pierced his side. And I had never heard about the tears of blood, though, until I saw it. But and this woman had the full stigmata. And this was Theresa Neumann. And her story is that when she was, at this point in her life, she was probably in her mid-40s. But when she was about 18, she was on a ladder helping to pass buckets of water to put out a fire at a neighboring farm. And she fell off the ladder, this is the story, and was blinded and paralyzed. And she claimed that while she was in that state, she was visited by Saint Therese of Lisieux in France. And she was told that she would be cured. And I think about 2 years later, she was cured of the blindness and paralysis. Except, the Lord never taketh away, but he giveth. From that point on, every Friday, every Shabbos, she would go into a trance and bleed the wounds and wake up the next day. And she said that while she was in that state, she experienced herself as a witness at the scene of the crucifixion. And she'd been watched by people to make sure that she wasn't doing something under the table. From that point on, when the wounds of Christ visited her and the unconscious coma, whatever it was, she didn't eat or drink except communion twice a day. We used to sing a song, let me tell you that first, to the tune of Lily Marlene. And it was, "Oh, Mr. Truman, when do we go home? We have captured Berlin and we have taken Rome. We have mastered the master race, so why is there no shipping space? Oh, when do we go home? Oh, when do we go home?" Great voice. You had to accumulate a certain amount of points to be discharged, to be sent home. And also you could take a discharge in Europe. You didn't have to go back to the United States. And the points were accumulated on how much time you were in combat and how much time you were in the service and so forth. At the end of September of 46, I had the points and I was sent back on a Liberty ship with God knows how many other guys. I remember being excited to be coming home until the ship was going up the lower bay. And I could see on the right cars and people going along on the Brooklyn side and couldn't quite see what was happening on Staten Island side. And at that point, I realized that I was sorry I had not taken a discharge in Europe, because I felt, and I was mistaken, but I felt that I was coming home to the same old, same old. But actually it wasn't the same old, same old. We had the GI Bill. And just before I had been discharged, and for a while before that, I got out of the infantry into Army Special Services. We were putting on shows all around the American area. And that awakened my love for music and theater, which I had never had a chance to participate in, but I'd always had this secret desire. And so, make a long story short, I applied to Juilliard, of all places, as student composer, and I was accepted. They only accepted me, I'm convinced, because I was a returning GI. But I started a new life, a new world, being involved in the arts, not just music and theater, but dance and painting and reading and writing. And so for a long time, my world had not only changed, but excluded all the bullshit about patriotism that I learned to be when I was a kid, and a lot of what I had learned as a combat man. And but slowly over the years, I became aware of the bullshit that the government puts out, of the horrors of what was going on to black people, of the deceit and just deceit about the greatest country, the greatest democracy the world has never known. So my civic and social senses were slowly being awakened after this couple of years of respite, studying music and being involved more directly in the arts. And one of the major things that crashed into me was when Emmett Till was killed and murdered in North Carolina, I don't remember where. And his mother released the pictures of that poor battered bastard. And I was living in Manhattan then, in the Greenwich Village, and I went uptown to Harlem to a protest meeting about him. And there were zillions of people in the streets complaining. And it was at that era when I was getting reawakened to civil rights and social rights and human rights that I remembered as a boy seeing pictures in the papers when, 8, 10, 12 years old, of the scenes that Billie Holiday sings about in the song Strange Fruit Hanging from the Poplar Trees. The bodies of incinerated and hung blacks. And, I remember seeing them when I was a little kid, but the reality of it didn't come through to me then when I was that age. But it all started coming back. Yeah, Irene and I and our kids were living in San Francisco. I was at a civil rights demonstration in Oakland. And it was announced that a minister, priest, preacher, whatever, in Selma had been killed. This was shortly after the first attempt of the people to go over the Edmund Pettus Bridge that was rebuffed and people were driven back and beaten on. And that this minister happened to be white. And for better or worse, I told Irene I was going to Selma, and I got down there a couple of days before the march actually started. And it was wonderful, man. Being among all those people, mostly black and white, and going to Brown's Chapel and listening to Jesse Jackson and John Lewis speak, and just being there was wonderful, beautiful, exciting, alive. And I think maybe only 2 or 3 days before the march started, there were 2 school buses of us who went out of the black community into the white community to make a sidewalk demonstration. And we were all almost immediately arrested and taken to the jail, which wasn't big enough to contain all of us, so we were fingerprinted and photographed, or whatever they did, and marched to a building next door, which was like a community center. And I'm very proud of something that happened that night. All of us are 150 maybe, or something like that. We're all crowded into this building. And that night, at one point I was walking around and I chose to sit down next to a group of black men who were talking, and I thought I would listen in. And they were going on about Whitey this and Whitey that and Whitey motherfucker, Whitey. And I got nervous and I got up and one of the guys said to me, "Where you going?" And I said, "I feel uncomfortable here. It looks like you don't want me to be sitting in here hanging on about Whitey." And he said, "Sit down, you a nigger too." And I feel proud of that because I took it seriously. You know, it was another indication to me of that I have succeeded in being a little part of the things that I believe are important. You know, I'm proud to have been described that way. We live here in this country in a fascist state. I use the description of a fascist state, the antonym, as when corporations run a government. That's fascism. That description was first come to in Italy. In any event, corporations and some people make big fat bucks. Certain politicians' careers are advanced by wars. And for me, there's no question about that. It's the fascist state that we live in here and now is not, or I shouldn't say is not, is more sophisticated than European fascism of the 30s. Much more sophisticated. Whereas as a former prisoner of American jails told me once, we're all walking around in minimum security. This country and the people here have, many of them, have lots of toys, have lots of benefits, have lots of advantages, have lots of whatever that many other people in this country don't have. The people who are beyond poor, the people who are victims of racism, which is rampant in this country today, victims of the people who have the knowledge that they are out for making their bucks at the expense of others and who manage every fucking time to talk the country into giving up their lives and their futures and going to war. And you know, it's insane to me that people will decry war. They will speak against war. War is horrible and so forth. The next war, bang, they're off. What has happened to their consciousness? Is it more dangerous to stand, as John Lewis said in one of the books that I'm reading right now about the Freedom Riders, is it more dangerous to stand for 30 seconds in peace than to give your life in a war? I can't really get my head around the fact that so many people will go off to war. And now, of course, we've got young people being bought into it. You know, they're mercenaries. And I certainly care about the guys and the women who are fighting wars. But they got their ass into it. They volunteered. And whether it was a matter of they couldn't afford not to be soldiers, I have a problem with that. I have a real problem with that. The military doesn't look to recruit old folks like us. They're not interested in old folks. And for good reason. We don't have the stamina. We don't have the desire. It might be from several different sources, but, you know, I don't have the desire to pick up a rifle again and go shoot other people. But most importantly, the young people do not have what I choose to call developed empathy. When I was a soldier, I was trained to see the people that I was looking at through the sights of my M1 as objects. They were not people. If they put down their weapon and walked up and we could talk a little bit, and then they became people. But through a gun sight, no. They're objects. That's what military training does to you. At this point in my life, if I happen to be looking through the sights of a rifle or any weapon, and I see somebody out there, I don't see an object. I see a person, a human being. And the lack of empathy is what gives so many men and women the ability to kill. Where was Sergeant Calley and the rest of his guys when they had a village surrounded that was populated with old women, old men, and children in Vietnam, in My Lai? Where was their empathy? Where was their, as one example, where was their feeling that a human being would have? They're looking at human beings, defenseless human beings, and they're setting fire to them. They're killing them. Where was their empathy? No. The lack of empathy is the fuel of war. The fuel. I don't think I know how to say it better than that. Well, there's a lot of things that keep me going. Probably the first thing is laughter. Without laughter, we're doomed. And the arts, and my friends, and my family, and my hope for the future, which includes getting rid of this lousy system that we live under. It's the system that occludes people's minds, that bribes them to be non-human. Yeah, there's certainly psychopaths that come along on this, but I think that in general, most people want to live peaceful lives and not get ahead on the necks and heads of other people. I think that most people looking at the examples of racism, not only here in this country, but look at Israel. I don't know how many Israelis are ashamed of what their country is doing, but I know that there are some. And my hopes for myself in this world is to see and to help to see an end to the system that we live under. It's not democracy, it never was, never. When we had the American Revolution, we got out from under a British Parliament and an English king and immediately established the exact same thing here. Women couldn't participate in the government. Poor white men couldn't participate in the government. Native nations couldn't participate in the government. Black people couldn't participate in the government. Only rich, white, motherfucking slave owners could run the government. And even though the anti-federalists managed to insert into the Constitution in 1797 or thereabouts, the implementation of the Bill of Rights is still waiting to happen.